Again, I haven't introduced myself yet. Jim did, but my name is Sarah Untersea. I'm a consultant here at Region 10. We are so happy to have Cindy Lee with us today. She is a master consultant in early childhood special education, and her presentation today is called Shining the Light on Early Childhood Transitions. So I'm going to turn it over to her.
Hi, good afternoon, and I apologize for the technical difficulties, but we will get started. We're going to talk today about just early childhood transitions. Some of those, the first transitions our children experience and that we as parents experience as our kids are moving through different organizations and different types of services. So you can go to the next slide. And we're going to kind of talk today about what is the difference between early childhood intervention, which is known as ECI, and what is early childhood special education, which is the services you get through the school district. I'm going to share some documents that were created. One is a parent's guide. One is how to support early childhood transitions. And then the other one is those next steps to independence, which gives skills and strategies that parents, educators can do to try to help their children build their own independence and help them become successful adults. And so next slide. So what is early childhood intervention? And that is early childhood intervention is commonly known as ECI. And it is a program that is from birth until the child turns 3 years of age. So the day your child turns 3, they are no longer eligible for early childhood intervention. And that's when that first transition happens, when we transition into the school district. So ECI, it's state and federally funded. And it is part of IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Act. Eligible children can receive services from the day they're born or until they turn 3. And so the day they turn 3, those services stop. And for those, the eligibility is determined through an evaluation, and they determine if that child has a delay, a disability, or any kind of a developmental delay. Next slide. So to qualify for early childhood intervention, you have to have a medically diagnosed condition that is likely to cause a developmental delay. You can be deaf or hard of hearing, or have a visual impairment. Or the third way is to have a developmental delay. And what they consider a delay is 25% delay in one or more categories. So social, emotional, self-help, communication, motor functions, or cognition. If you have any kind of what they consider a 25% delay in one of those areas, that would qualify you for ECI. The only exception is expressive language. And the difference in expressive and receptive language is receptive language is understanding what someone says to you, whereas expressive is your ability to talk and express yourself. So being able to express your wants and your needs and what you need. If you have that expressive delay, it needs to be 30%. So that's the only time when it's a little bit greater is to have that 33% delay if you are what they consider expressively delayed as opposed to one of the other categories. So next slide. In Texas, you don't have to have it in every area, just one area is going to be enough to qualify you for ECI services. And one big difference you'll find out in a minute between ECI and what the school district provides is that ECI will provide evaluations at no cost. So anybody can ask for their child to be evaluated, and that evaluation is free. However, if you need services, those services can be provided on a cost share basis. So those might not be free. Next slide. So moving on to what is early childhood special education. And that's where that first transition for our little ones happens. And early childhood special education is the services that are provided by the school district. Not necessarily just the place where they're provided, it's all the services that that school district offers. And that can include, next slide. Whoops. I think we might be, so it can include, sorry, I'll just tell you what it can include. It can include speech services. It can include a pre-K classroom. It can include going into a what they call a self-contained classroom, a special education classroom. But it's basically whatever that individual child needs in order to be served in the classroom. So they must meet more than one of the 13 disability criteria that are identified in IDEA. So those are different than ECI because a developmental delay is not a qualifying condition for ECSE, but it is for ECI. So that's one of the big differences. The other big difference is that the disability for school-based services must also have an educational need. So you can have a disability, but if you don't have that educational need, then you might not qualify for school-based services. And then another one is that the ARD committee is what meets to determine eligibility for those children that qualify for school-based services. They'll meet, and parents are a part of that committee, but they meet, review the data, and then determine eligibility and services. So moving into some of the resources, and this is really the bulk of our presentation today, is some of these resources that are available to parents. So the first one that we're going to review is a parent's guide to early childhood intervention and ECSE. And a lot of the information I just shared came directly from this guide. So the next slide. The first thing that they share with you is the timeline. And so this is the timeline for what happens as your child starts to age out. And you can see it starts way before that child turns 3. But the most important thing to look at here is 90 days before that child will turn 3 or your child turns 3. That is when they'll do what's called a transition conference. And at that transition conference, that's when they'll start having conversations about that next step with parents. Next slide. So parents have the option to opt in or opt out of the referral process from ECI to the local school district. So if you're receiving ECI services, they'll ask you, do you want us to share the information with the school district or not? If you decide to opt in and allow ECI to share the information about your child, then a transition conference will be held at least 90 days before the child turns 3. That transition conference is a meeting between parents, the ECI program, and the school districts to begin the process of moving from one program to another. ECI has to obtain your written consent to move forward in the process. If you decline, the process stops. If you agree, that's when they schedule the transition conference and start the process of referral. Next slide. So who's at the transition conference? It's parents or guardians of the child. It's any family member, advocate, or anybody else that the parent or the family decides to invite. It's typically the ECI service coordinator, any evaluation personnel, or any people who are providing ECI services as appropriate. And then it's also what they call an LEA representative. And an LEA representative is a school representative, someone from that local school district. So the next slide. The conference can be held at your home, at the ECI provider's location. It can be held at the school district or anywhere that everybody agrees to hold that conference. Sometimes now, after COVID, a lot of the conferences are being held virtually. But so there's a lot of options of where that conference can be held, depending on what is most convenient or best for everybody involved. So what happens at the conference? Well, that's when we discuss the rights of parents and guardians to keep consistency. The school district will explain the referral process, steps, and timelines that will happen as they move towards that school-based evaluation. They'll also discuss the rights of the parents and the guardians and the right to keep consistency for that child's services. They'll answer any questions that the parents have, and they may discuss potential placement options if that child is determined to be eligible for ECSE services. So it's important to think about what you might want to ask at the transition conference. And this parent's guide gives you some ideas of questions that you might want to ask. One of the first ones is, what are the differences between ECI and school-based services? And even though I've given you a brief overview, it's always good to hear it again, and especially hear it from the school that your child might be going to. Another question is, how will our child's eligibility be determined? And then if my child qualifies for services, what are the ways that the school may provide services? You might want to ask if your child qualifies for services, is it possible to visit a classroom or a program that your child might be attending to kind of get an idea of what it looks like? That can help you prepare your child. How can we best share our child's unique strengths and needs, both with the evaluation team and then potentially with any teachers or educators who might be serving your child? And then another question is, what are the next steps? So what comes next? These are not the only questions you can ask. Of course, you can ask any question as you deem appropriate. So after the transition conference is held, the evaluation process begins. So the local school district, the LEA, must notify the parent and obtain signed consent before evaluating a child. When the child has been receiving services from ECI for at least 90 days before his or her third birthday, and ECI notifies the school district, the full and individual evaluation, which is called the FIIE, the ARD committee meeting, and the individual education plan have to be developed and implemented by your child's third birthday. And that's to keep that consistency so that when they stop receiving ECI services, they also can start receiving school-based services if they qualify. The ARD committee develops and adopts an IEP at least annually. And parents, the student when appropriate, school professionals, and others serve on that committee. So that ARD committee will happen at least once a year. That ARD committee will meet to determine eligibility based on the results of that full and individual evaluation. And if the child is determined to be eligible for special education, then that ARD committee will develop an IEP, and that IEP will describe the specific services and supports a student needs. So it's a written plan that kind of guides the specialized aspects of the child's school day, their instructional day, and their school experience. So those are the 4 steps of the evaluation process that will happen between that transition conference and if the child is eligible when that child turns 3. So there's a lot of, another thing that this guide has is some tips for parents. Having a child with a disability can be overwhelming. And so having a way to organize yourself and keep everything you need available is very important. So organizing an IEP binder. So keeping some kind of a binder with all of your child's special education documents. Always asking questions and making sure that you understand the process and what's being recommended for your child. Engaging in pretend play activities with your child that mimic school. So play school, play teacher, so they kind of get used to what school might look like. Visiting the new teacher or the classroom before the first day. You may ask to take a picture of that teacher to take home with you to help your child become familiar with that person and ease that transition into the school district. Some other tips are reading books to your child about the first day of school and sharing information about your child's interests, their likes, and their dislikes with your new teacher and therapist so that they can get to know your child. And sometimes you might be able to ask if your child can take a favorite toy or a photo of your family to school on the first day. Kind of helps provide security and ease the transition. Some teachers will allow that and some will not, but that's something you can always ask. So another document that is there it was created by the Transition Network is supporting early childhood transitions. And this is a guide that really is more applicable for as that child is turning 5 or 6 and starting kindergarten, because again, that's another change going from an early childhood or pre-K type program into kindergarten. And so in this guide, it talks about how to ease that transition. And so there's some tips on how to establish that supportive early childhood environment that helps prepare children for kindergarten. How to promote that communication between teachers and those collaborative relationships between teachers and the school district. How to develop a cohesive transition plan, and then building self-determination skills. And that's kind of what we're going to move into next, is that self-determination skills. So this is a new guide that just came out. It's called Next Steps to Independence, Skills and Strategies. And when I say new, it like literally just came out. And so what it has is it has broken down from birth until that child is what we call post-secondary, which is like age 22. And it's broken down into choice making and decision making, goal setting and independence, self-management and self-awareness, and then self-determination and self-advocacy. This checklist, it helps educators, families, and students as they get older monitor their progress on skills that are shown to be skills that people need to have in order to have success after school, meaning after that child turns 18. And I know you may be thinking, what? We're planning for when my child turns 18. They're barely turning 3 now, but it's important to start laying that foundation now. And so the first one that you look at is choice making and decision making. So helping that child, even as young as, birth, start to make choices. Choosing between 2 items. It can be, which shirt do you want to wear? What snack do you want? And indicating a preference of toys, either through, their eye gaze, how they look at it, pointing to a toy, or even using words when they're able to. But being able to make choices helps lay that foundation for making choices when they get older and build those decision-making skills. The next area is that goal setting and independence. And so helping your child set goals, that could be helping with simple chores around the house. You're going to help me put up the clothes or sort socks, put different color socks or different color towels together. But it's and as well as following simple 2-step directions, asking them to go get their shoes or go put their shoes in their room, or then moving up to 2 steps, pick up your shoes from the living room and then take them to the bedroom. Sometimes those 2-step directions take a little while to learn, but that helps build independence, which is so important for laying that foundation to be successful and have that independence as you get older. Another area is that self-management and self-awareness. It's okay to be upset, to be frustrated, to be disappointed. Children, everyone is going to like one thing better than another. It might be you have a preference for a certain kind of food or a preference for a certain type of a certain toy. But having that, it's expressing a preference by showing their likes or dislikes appropriately, and then also being able to display frustration or disappointment. That helps our child be able to manage their own emotions, be self-aware of how they feel, which is another skill that's really important. And then finally, self-determination and self-advocacy. Talking to your child in a back and forth manner, even if it includes babbling or smiling, helps build those self-language and self-advocacy skills. So when your child's young and they're babbling, ba, 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 talk to them and then have them babble back at you. That's beginning that communication, that back and forth, and teaching them the conventions of language. I talk, you talk, I talk, you talk. But that helps also build those self-determination and self-advocacy. So this document, well, I just showed you birth to 3. It also goes up, well, we'll do the next slide first. It goes all the way to 22, and we're going to look at that in a second. One of the other things that this has that's really nice is it tells you important action steps for families based on your child's age. So putting your child on a Medicaid waiver as soon as a disability is identified. You might think that they don't need that when they're 3, but some programs have a really long wait list. So being able to put your child on those wait lists when they're young will help them get the services they may need when they get older. Because even if they don't need them, it's better to have them available and turn them down than not to have them available at all. And then it also helps you with teaching and learning strategies, because some of us, we may not know how to help build choice-making and decision-making skills, or how to help our children be self-aware. And so looking at establishing predictable routines, limiting choices, offer choices for 2 options, create an organized play area so that everything's organized and there's not so much to get into that they might be overstimulated. And then acknowledging their choice, however they communicate it, whether it's eye gaze, gesture, or voice. Those are all things parents can do to help build choice making and decision makings, between the age of birth and 3. For goal setting and independence, it can be encouraging their requests for help, encouraging them to ask to help get them food, help put on their shoes, help them when they need something. Breaking tasks down into really small steps, it helps build that independence and it helps them feel successful. Encouraging expressions of preferences and desires. Model how to accomplish goals. So as you are, if my goal is to put the dishes up, I'm going to model how I accomplish that goal and the steps I take so they can see that I set goals for myself and I accomplish those. Also encouraging independence by allowing mistakes and self-correction, because we all make mistakes. We all have to fix things. So if they're building a tower of blocks and it falls over, that's okay. We're going to rebuild it and start over again. And then help your child set those small goals. We're going to put this little, 4-piece puzzle together. We're going to build a tower with 4 blocks, whatever that child is capable of, but help them set the goal. Today, our goal, we're going to do this. And then when we accomplish it, celebrate that. And then also encourage them to step outside their comfort zone and attempt some of those unfamiliar tasks. So let them try something different. Let them play with a toy they might not be used to, that might not be their favorite. To build those self-management and self-awareness skills, you want to encourage trying different things, trying different foods, playing with different toys. Help them calm themselves through breathing strategies. Taking those deep belly breaths when you get upset helps calm us, helps calm yourself. Encourage them to express their emotion. Acknowledge it's okay to be sad. It's okay to be mad. It's okay to be upset. But let's talk about how we can show those emotions appropriately. Reward or reinforce the desired behaviors. So when they do something you want them to do, reinforce that. Give them an acknowledgement that they're doing it. And make sure you're acknowledging their feelings. You're feeling sad right now, and that's okay. And also encourage that independent expression of likes and dislikes. It's okay if they don't like the same food I like. We all have different tastes. And then finally, building those self-determination and self-advocacy skills is allowing them to solve problems. If they can't figure out how to get a toy to work, give them a little time to try to figure it out on their own before you jump in and solve it for them. Don't let them get to the point of frustration, but give them a few minutes to try it. Sometimes it might even be put a toy slightly out of their reach. So they have to figure out, how am I going to scoot over and grab that toy and get that snack, something I want, on my own without just giving it to them. And so letting them try to help that, taking that self-advocacy and getting things for themselves. If you look next, I could give you another example of kind of the same areas: choice making and decision making, goal setting and independence, self-management and self-awareness, and self-determination and self-advocacy. But this is looking at grades 9 to 12. So what would a high school student do? So it might be selecting courses, applying for a job, assisting with developing their own IEP. Those are choices that a high school student might make. They might get a part-time job or try to figure out what they want to study if they're going to go to college. They might be able to take their medication on their own or interact with their peers appropriately. And they might be able, again, they're going to make choices between 2 choices, but also taking that a step farther and understanding the consequences of their action. So if I make this choice, what might happen, positively or negatively? And next slide. And then it also will tell you on this at high school, some important action steps for you to take. You see it gets a lot longer as your child gets older. And again, there's that Medicaid waiver, talking about what changes happen in that child's life when they turn 18, because then they become a legal adult. Talking about transition vocational rehabilitation. So some things that they might do as far as, are they going to get a job? What might that look like? But this just gives you a lot of information of what you would do, as that child is aging out of high school. And then it also gives you teaching and learning strategies in all of those areas to work with that child as they get older. And so this is a great document, I think, not just because it tells you what your child should be doing, but it also tells you how to do it. Because I think that's so important. It's not just telling you what to do, but tell me how to accomplish that and how to do it also. So do we have any questions, or do we want to stop for questions?
We did have one question that I was able to answer a few questions as you were presenting. One question that we had was the difference between early childhood special education and 504.
Okay. So the best way I know to explain it is that 50, both of them are services that are available for children with disabilities. But if you think about an umbrella, a 504 umbrella is a much smaller umbrella because there are accommodations you can give that student. There are supports you can provide for that student in the school district or in their classroom, but you're not being able to modify their curriculum or change what they're learning. You're just giving them tools or accommodations to help them be successful. Whereas early childhood special education is a bigger umbrella. And in that you have more accommodations, you have more services you can provide that student. And you can also modify the curriculum. And when I say modify the curriculum, I mean that if you're thinking about pre-K, there are pre-K guidelines, which they say is what a child should learn when that child is in pre-K. And so if you're modifying that, you may say that, a pre-K student might learn to count to 20, but Johnny, we may only ask him to count to 10 by the end of the year because that's what's appropriate for him. So we are changing or modifying his expected outcome. And that can be done in special education, but not in 504. But there's also like speech therapy, occupational therapy. Some of those services are only provided through special education as well. So if your child needs one of those, that would not be available through 504. Did that answer the question for them?
I think that was a great answer. Cindy, thank you so much for being here today. We appreciate your time, and sorry for all the technical difficulties.
No worries.
I know sometimes computers are a little finicky, so I'm glad that you got on there. We were able to share the screen this way. We have learned to be.
They got me in my computer, so about halfway through the presentation, they fixed it, whatever was wrong with it. So I'm in now.
We have all learned to be flexible over the past couple of years, if nothing else. For everyone that was here today or registered for today's webinar, I will send you out an email following this webinar later on this afternoon or tomorrow that has the links to some of the resources that Cindy was discussing during her webinar today, as well as our flyer for our December family webinar, which will take place on December 14th. And the topic of that webinar is manifestation determination ARDS and hearings. And so that is also, we're kind of going from one end of the spectrum to the other, since those manifestation hearings oftentimes are for our older students. But it is another great webinar with a lot of great information that we will be sharing.
And so I did have, before we close out, I had a little video at the end of my presentation. I love this because it's a poem. It's in a video format, but it's a poem that was written by a parent of a child with a disability. And she talks about how it feels as a parent and some of the stages that you go through and how wonderful it can be to be the parent of a child with a disability. So can you get back to that, or?
Experienced this last week. I know that my settings aren't set up for me to play a video through Zoom, the things we learn through experience, but I'll make sure and include the link to that video, Cindy, when I email all of our participants from today. I'll go in and kind of grab that link and I'll include that in the email so that they're able to go back and watch that as well.
Okay. And I can kind of just give you like a synopsis of it. It's about, like you're planning a trip and you think you're going to Italy. And so you plan your whole trip around what you want to do when you're in Italy. And you think about you're going to visit the Michelangelo and you might go to the gondolas in Venice. And then all of a sudden the pilot says, welcome to Holland. And you stop and you think, Holland? I didn't sign up to go to Holland. I signed up for Italy. I'm supposed to be in Italy. And it's what I've dreamed of my whole life. But all of a sudden there's been a change. And now you're in Holland. But the thing to remember is that Holland isn't a horrible, disgusting, filthy place. It's just different. So you may have to go out and buy new guidebooks. You may have to learn a whole new language and meet different people you never would have met. But it's just a different place. It might be a little slower paced, but it has windmills, it has tulips, it has Rembrandts, and it is a wonderful place. And so sometimes you might feel that everybody you know is busy coming and going from Italy and they're bragging about what a wonderful time they had. And you may think, yeah, that's where I was supposed to go. But if I spend my whole life mourning the fact I didn't get to go to Italy, I may never be free to enjoy the very special, lovely things that are Holland. And so I love that, because every time I hear that, it makes me think, yeah, there's a lot of wonderful things that you get to experience, and embrace those and celebrate those every day.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We appreciate your time today.